Item 8.2, this is a presentation, discussion, possible action regarding the development and sale of city-owned Northgate property and planning efforts for the redevelopment of the Northgate district. And I see it's under Mr. Wood's heading, but Mr. Mr. Armstrong is first up. Welcome, Mr. Armstrong. You're going to make a presentation?
Yes, sir. Good evening, Mayor, Council. Anthony Armstrong, Planning and Development Services. It'll be a presentation by both myself and Mr. Ostrowski today to go over this item. So a little background on what this item is. So this was a future agenda item requested by the council to look at the kind of broader area of Northgate as a small area plan. So kind of walk us through what we're going to talk about today. I'll start off kind of talking about what a small area plan is. So kind of what can it do, what can it not do, what its purpose is, what is the proposed area that we're talking about or what was asked for by the council. What's the history of kind of this area. So I'll go through the history of Northgate. Specifically, that's the small area plan that we have, or that we usually just sunsetted, but the one we have currently, or have done in the past. And then we'll talk about some potential timelines for a small area plan for this broader area, what that would look like, and some details, and kind of get some direction from you there. After that, I'll turn it over to Michael. He'll talk about the city-owned property, the surface lot. As I go through this, feel free to ask questions. This kind of gives you a broad level. It'll be a little lengthy, I apologize, but we can go through it. If you have questions, just let me know and I'll stop and be happy to answer those. So kind of what is a small area plan? To start us off, it usually is a neighborhood level or a corridor level plan. It goes through and talks about land use, infrastructure needs, open space, transportation requirements, looks at demographics, different things like that. And so we start that off in the first phase with what we call pre-planning, so that identifies the boundaries, where we can analyze what existing conditions are outstanding. So what demographic information, what physical information do we need to kind of help format this plan, and then identify what our outreach potentials would be. Who are those stakeholders? Who are we want to look for to get some public feedback from? As it would imply, a small area plan being a neighborhood focus is usually neighborhood driven. So those citizens in that area typically are the community drivers for that area plan. It is little different than the comp plan that's citywide, right? You're talking about a specific area, and so it doesn't, it is meant to be in line with the comprehensive plan. So the city already has an adopted document through the comp plan that kind of gives us a vision what we want the city to develop out as. This kind of narrows that focus in specifically to an area. It can be used as a policy guide for council and even for staff, so it can help make decisions. It kind of makes sure that we're all using the same playbook. So everybody involved in the process in that area knows this is the vision that we have for that area. Here's the playbook we're acting by. So when staff brings something to the council or acts on something, we're using that as our guidelines or kind of our vision statement, and ultimately council as well. We'll talk about some specifics towards the end on what can be done with the small area plan, but it can look at things like housing strategies, economic development strategies, and so we can talk through things, during the planning efforts, things like density caps or incentives for certain kinds of developments and things of that nature. I do want to point out that a small area plan does not guarantee that all those things in that plan happen, so we just did the small area plan audit. Over all of our small area plans, we just sunsetted 3 of them about two months ago in October, Northgate being one of them. And in all of those plans, there was Wolf Pen Creek, Northgate, and the Medical District Master Plan. All of those had about a 75 to 80% completion rate. So it's not to say that everything in that plan is a guarantee. It's kind of what is it that we're striving for and aiming towards in this period of time. It is also not a zoning code, so it doesn't create regulations, but it might help influence that. So the Northgate districts we have today, those requirements, those were generated by past efforts in the Northgate area. So again, with the small area plan, phase 1 was kind of where we're at right now, is this very preliminary stage of pre-planning what we would need to look at. Phase 2 is where staff would go forward and look at existing conditions and kind of get what that vision is from the community. So existing conditions are the demographics, the number of beds or housing stock, and we'll go over that a little bit later when we kind of narrow down into a couple of areas. Zoning and land use, code enforcement things, our economic indicators in the area, and different metrics. This is also where we start that initial community feedback, so we try to get on the front end, what are people expecting to see? It gives us kind of our guidelines to move forward with and the lanes, if you will, for the plan. And then we start kind of driving down those lanes with phase 3, really refining the findings that we got during that engagement process, and kind of draft an original plan. Once that plan is drafted, going through staff, going through the stakeholders, we bring that back to them for kind of some final feedback after we've looked at addressing those changes and gathering some consensus. And then ultimately end with phase 4 of the adoption by council, and then ultimately that creates an implementation piece. All of our plans have implementation parts at the end of it, and again, those are items that we could require additional funding, SLA requests to the council, et cetera, but they're not guarantees. So the request asked for the small area plan was kind of the area you see out here outlined in yellow. So this includes everything from Welborn over to Texas along University up to the city limits. And so I'm going to kind of start high level with this whole area, and then kind of we're going to narrow ourselves down ultimately until Michael's piece of the presentation in Northgate. We're going to kind of make our way back into the Northgate area and talk about each section. So the first one we're going to talk about is it's actually part of an existing small area plan. The Northeast Gateway plan is the North Point Crossing area. You've recently seen an item in this area. Most of this area, while it's in this same boundary zone, it is part of the Northeast Gateway plan. It's about 17 or so acres total. The Northeast Gateway plan, this is a snippet from that plan. This is a preferred scenario, shows essentially redevelopment or a large redevelopment about one of those parcels, but in essence, most of this is kind of envisioned to stay relatively the same. One thing that was included in here that has since changed was the change from the amount of commercial in the area was reduced recently, and so we'll have to look at that and see if that needs any sort of addressing, but certainly this piece is connected to the overall area through Hensel Drive and Century Square and Hensel Park, and we'll talk about those more here in a second. The next one area is the Century Hill development, or Century Square development, excuse me. This is about 60 acres. Primarily, this is one of the more recent brochures. The front half, as we all know, I think is kind of all the retail commercial development. There's a little bit of multifamily in there, but it currently hosts about 200 hotel rooms, 60K of office, 200K of retail, and 250 multifamily units. The university apartments you see in the image in the back, as well as that vacant area, are currently planned to be additional residential units to populate that area. I think if you drive by right now, you can notice that phase 2 of the commercial, so this kind of frontage along University, is currently under development underway. And then the hard corner there, they're looking at potential users for, again, more commercial spaces in that area. I think something interesting about this as it fits into the overall picture is that from a kind of a planning standpoint, it has kind of really become the catalyst for this area, or this kind of area as a whole. Century Square has, due to its nature as being a public and private partnership. So there's some other entertainment districts that we've looked at in the University of Tennessee. They have an island entertainment district, and so that district in particular was able to get a good backing because it was a 3P or a public-private partnership with the University of Tennessee, where they were able to give the land, have development agreements, and create that connection and incentive for the developer to really put in a very catalytic project on it. And so using government property, city-owned property, and going through the development agreement process can have a lot of merit to helping generate kind of catalytical sites in areas, as we saw with Century Square and as the University of Tennessee is seeing with their Nyland Entertainment District. The next one we'll talk about is Hensel Park. So Hensel Park is about another 76 or so acres. The Regents first heard about it back in '22. Kind of the initial take on how they were going to go about redeveloping or looking to redevelop the park and make it give it more of a sense of place. And so this was heard back in October of this year. This image here on the left shows a couple of different things that they proposed and asked for. It's pretty far out. They've got a long ways to go. But part of this process and this development has been in conjunction with the city. So there has been considerable input and involvement with both the City of College Station, the City of Bryan, Texas A&M on this tract, and members of city staff are on a committee that meet to talk about this development and how it can be coordinated with both entities and the area at large. To kind of orient you a little bit, on the far left of the image, there's a little arrow right there highlighted. That is Inlow, so that's the city limit line above Northgate, and it would be a connector through all the way over to the signal at Rosemary on the far right-hand side. Is kind of the overall plan. Again, the overall cost for that plan, I think for phase one, which is the area outlined, is about $10 million, and to my knowledge, that hasn't been allocated yet. The next one to talk about is actually being done in the city of Bryan. So this is bordered with Enlow Street, which is the street at the bottom in between the city limits. This is, I believe, some people call it the North by Northgate plan, or North of Northgate plan. This is a project the city of Bryan is doing where they're purchasing up property in the Oakwood Terrace neighborhood to tear down those structures and redevelop them. So right now, the city of Bryan owns about 37 out of 101 lots that they've already purchased. They're looking to, they've got about a third of them purchased. There's about 18 to 19 million in appraised value left to still purchase, so they still have some ways to go to finish purchasing out these lots. The image on the left is their consultant, I believe, OmniPlan, the developer, and kind of what they plan to do with it. It is primarily a multifamily development, a little bit of mixed use, some office space along South College area, and a little bit of retail in that core dead center of the establishment. Again, they're about a third of the way through buying property. Looks like it started via deeds about the last 4 to 5 years, so probably can envision a little bit more. Yes, sir.
Has the city of Bryan reached out to us, or anybody affiliated with them reached out to us about connectivity between this and between the cities?
Yeah, I think there's certainly will be discussions through it. At this point, they're probably pretty early in that design process, right? They're only about a third of the property. They have a vision for the area, but they're still, when you look through kind of this initial design, they're looking to kind of take this block of about 30 acres and almost make it an individual site, and then there'd be connectivity into it. So there is, in their plans, there is connectivity over to Hensel Park. There is connectivity down South College between the two cities, and then over towards Nagel. So hopefully this works. So through here, and currently there's some level of connectivity to that nature. I can draw relatively straight, I promise. It does have some curve to it to get through there, but that's the current envisionment for that plan. But again, that's probably fairly far out of this rate, at least from in terms of acquisition standpoint.
And this is
Councilman Yancey, to answer your question, yes, staff from Bryan and from College Station have started initial discussions of how there may be connectivity at the Inlow intersection of those two.
that was going to be my next question. Inlow is I guess an integral part of that, right? Because it is essentially the border.
Correct. It would be the border between the two cities, and then also it becomes a large proponent of Hensel Park as well. So there'll be a lot of talk on the connectivity around that street, particularly as we go forward with the various developments.
Thank you.
And again, a key component of this area as a whole would be University Drive, of course. Again, University Drive is a TxDOT road, but of course the city has heavy involvement with TxDOT in different projects as we go about our business. Most recently, there was a large pedestrian improvement project done about 6 or 7 years ago, where there were a lot of pedestrian improvements made on the city side, if you will, not the A&M side, so much of University, with pedestrian improvements and then signal timing changes to help with pedestrian crossings, et cetera. And so most recently, the TxDOT came out with a conceptual study, which was a follow-up on a study they had done a few years back, where there was kind of this envisionment, some images going around of, in essence, looking to turn University into kind of an underground road, and you would have a top-level pedestrian corridor across the whole way. It's very expensive. And so the consultant was asked to go back and come up with some alternatives. And so through that process, they presented some findings actually just last week. And I'll kind of walk through a couple of those highlights here, but there's 4 to 5 intersections. We're going to cover 4 of them that have been called out as being grade differentiated crossings. So the first one is at College, Maine. So this would be a open concept where the road, the path you see in the middle of the screen, that is an extension of College, Maine. So in between the existing promenade that the city owns through College, Maine. And then if you look in the very far left of the top left corner of the image, that would be Boyette Street. So this is kind of that stretch. This would be the open concept, obviously, and then this would be the closed concept for this particular area. There's 2 different designs for this one, kind of 2 different spaces and obviously dollars to go into those. The next intersection would be over at Spence Street, so this would be an underground. University Drive would go over, pedestrians would go underneath. This is the concept, so this is again kind of near the McDonald's area. It would be passing through there. This is the concept for that crossing. The next one would be in front of Century Square, so this is going to be that where the arrow's pointing, that same driveway is the driveway that's over here. And so this would be a pedestrian crossing that kind of connects Century Square and the university across, again, with an above-ground pedestrian concept and some activity areas there. And then finally, they have at the Polo Road and Century Square Drive-In, another kind of below grade and kind of raising the grade of the University Street and the University, Texas A&M University roads to make this differential crossing. And again, here's kind of all of 4 of them that you can look at just to get a feel. Again, this is a conceptual, these are conceptual drawings so far, kind of ideas on what we could do to improve with TxDOT and the university and College Station working together. What are some ideas we could do to improve pedestrian mobility in the area? There isn't any sort of funding or kind of timeline for this. The city has written to Congress about funding for this, so we have done, city manager's office has put together a package to send to Congress, or has been sent to Congress, that we're waiting to hear back from in January on kind of next steps on potential funding to start this process potentially. It got just the measurements to get us kind of oriented to, just to give you an idea, this entire stretch of university, kind of this corridor we're talking about, is a little over a mile long. So Northgate itself, as we would view it, the Northgate districts are about 2/3 of a mile long, and it's about half a mile between College Avenue and Texas. So some pretty fair distances to go from the bars on Northgate over to where Harry's used to be would probably be about a 15-minute walk or so to get to those two establishments. And then the last area we certainly have a lot of familiarity with being the city and Northgate, and so I'm going to kind of talk through the history of Northgate and then dive into some deeper specifics on it. So back in 1990, Northgate was actually designated as a slum and blight area by HUD. So back then, in the early 1990s, it was considered slum and blight. If you look at it today, that area has an appraised value of about $804 million. So we have come quite a long ways in those 34 years in its revitalization, if you will, from slum and blight to approaching $1 billion in value. Yes, ma'am.
What was the dollar value again?
The current appraised value for the Northgate area is $804 million.
804, okay.
Sorry. And so off of that, the city had a plan for Northgate, I think as early as 86 was one of the first plans, kind of first committees, if you will. Then in 1994, there was a Northgate the document that has an interesting name, but it was essentially just called Northgate, but it was kind of this visioning document. So the document was kind of a stair-stepper, if you will. It gave an idea from, the city hired a consultant. They went out and looked at, got some general ideas for the history of the area, what are some tools to preserve that history, and then what are things that we can do to help start, what are some options the city could look into to start making that change. It wasn't quite at a scale of small area plan. It was more someone kind of coming in from a more scholastic view and saying, hey, here's what you could do with this area, and keep some history with it from a historical structure standpoint. Staff and the city used that plan eventually to obviously make the 1996 plan. Part of the 1990 designation by HUD, as well as this plan, generated the Northgate Facade Improvement Program. So that started in 1995, was the first use, ran until 2002. With that, there were 6 different facade improvement projects. And essentially what that did is that the city was able to do some public-private partnerships in those areas. We got money from CDBG funds in the tune of about $620,000. And essentially it was divvied up between these projects. There was certainly a large amount of private dollars involved as well in doing facelifts essentially to about 6 different structures throughout the Northgate area during this time period. Most of them happened in that first 3-year period between 95 and 98, and there was a couple stragglers towards the end of the 90s there that finished their projects. After that is when the city got into, or during that period really, when the city did the 1996 redevelopment plan. So this was kind of the first real robust small area plan, kind of what we just went through and sunsetted back in October, was this plan that kind of went through and talked through, again, kind of what we'd be talking about this plan would look like a little bit. So it talks about the existing demographics. Back then in 1996, there were 1,000 people that the plan said lived in Northgate, and it was very excited that 2,500 were joining in the next 3 to 5 years. Right now, there are about 9,000 people in Northgate. Between all the high-rises being constructed, and we'll talk some more about that. But certainly a very large growth that the city's seen. It also talked about some key components that at the time Northgate didn't have a real sense of place. It called for some idea for a main street. It specifically said that it could be revitalized and should be revitalized as a campus neighborhood to develop dense apartments, and that the city as an entity, as well as at the time, this was right after A&M had bought a large portion of property in the northeast corner of Northgate where there's now the youth center apartment complex, but the plan had called for kind of the selling of vacant land throughout Northgate. There was a lot of vacant properties kind of in that area, but selling that property to get some development in it. A couple key things that we'll talk about as we get into what's developed out there is that one of the suggestions in the plan that it wasn't part of the ordinances for Northgate and NG1, NG2, NG3 that we have today. But at the time, the plan called for a cap on, it suggested that we cap retail development at 2 stories and residential development at 3 stories. Obviously, walk out there today. That's not what happened. The city looked for a little bit more aggressive way to incentivize growth and development in that area, and it has certainly paid dividends, and we'll go over that here more in a bit. In 2003, there was the implementation plan. So the implementation plan was, in essence, it took the redevelopment plan and said, here's a list of, I think it was 165 different actionable items that the city, the state, the bar owners, the neighborhood association, the Northgate Neighborhood Association, which was called for to be created, kind of all these different things that people could do to help revitalize the Northgate area. And that was mentioned in the small area plan audit that we did a couple months ago. But out of those 165 items, 72% of them were implemented. So there was a number that were not pursued, or their status was unknown because it kind of maybe been lost to the depths of time. Kind of following up on that, again, an implementation plan is kind of a high level, what can you do as a city, what are changes you can do in the area. In 2020, Community Services conducted an operations plan. So this is more talking about what does the city have as assets, what are we doing down in Northgate, what can we do to help operational procedures for PD or for community services in that area. It's more looking at the city side of operations, less the overall area. And so with that plan, it generated about $4 million in future SLAs for what would be needed to help implement the operation plan suggestions. So there's about $4 million that'll be coming down the pipeline through SLAs. Based on that plan, it looks like we spent roughly about 100 or so towards a couple of and made some administrative changes that didn't really have cost statistics to them through that plan. Just real high level, that through that there's about $8.5 million of assets for the city in Northgate, and that's not including roads, water, sewer, utilities, things like that. That's just in terms of personnel, equipment, the bollards, things like that. There's about $8.5 million of total assets being used in the Northgate area currently. As unrelated to those previous plans, but kind of part of the implementation plan was here's some larger capital projects that we could have done. So this again was part of the audit plan. This is a map of specifically from the 2003 implementation plan. These were items identified that the city could do to help contribute to the growth in the area. So these are a number of projects the city took on over the last 21 years to implement aspects of that plan. In addition to that, that's not shown on the screen, is water, wastewater infrastructure improvements. So there's certainly things like the Northeast Trunk Line is one that project as a whole is certainly servicing, again, this large area we're talking about from Texas to Wellburn and all that in between. You need the downstream capacity as well all the way up to this area that those lines serve. And so altogether, including these projects plus some others, like there was a reconstruction of Tauber Street and Stasny and Cherry, and all those projects totaled to about $26 million that the city has put in the immediate area of Northgate. There's probably about another $5 to $7 million in utility improvements directly in the Northgate area. And then when you talk about the Northeast Trunk Line project, the budget for that is somewhere in $40 million for that entire line, again, which services not just Northgate, but that entire larger area through that we're talking about with this potential small area plan. So the city has invested a large amount just in capital expenditures for infrastructure projects in this area. Again, to kind of talk about Northgate specifically in their areas, and so what you see on the map here is an outline of each of our 3 zoning districts. So in Northgate, it's considered a design district. There are 3 different zones. The bottom left in purple is NG1, the pink in the bottom right is NG2, and then the upper area is known as NG3. So NG1 is going to be more of your mixed use area. It's generally, I think when we think of Northgate, that's the kind of development that we think of is the NG1 area. NG3 in the back is known as residential Northgate, so it's primarily intended to just be residential uses, not a mixture of uses like we intend for the kind of along Church Avenue area. And then in the bottom right, NG2 is kind of a hybrid, if you will. It's a little bit, it's meant to be kind of more commercial given its location on that hard corner where College Avenue and some existing commercial uses at the time, but it also has the ability to go and develop similar to NG1 and be a mix and have some density as you see with the Rise apartments and the Standard and the Stack and those kind of developments. I'm going to talk through a couple of areas specifically that are of interest in the broader Northgate area and touch on them each individually. The first one I'm going to talk about is what I think generally people think of when they say the term Northgate, and that would be, of course, be the entertainment district. So this is a image of specifically the area outlined in red. This includes the 2 city-owned lots, so the surface lot and the city parking garage, as well as about 31 different bars primarily. There's the bookstore and a couple other uses, and the old gas station that was ripped down, and the student service center, I think, across from the street from the city surface lot. This area generally, I think, is what is generally talked about as being Northgate, but it's kind of it's a portion of that. This area is only about 1,000 feet long. So again, when we talk about Northgate as a whole, Northgate is 2/3 of a mile long. This is about 0.2 miles. So it's a bit of it's a section of it, but certainly not what we want to look at holistically. Northgate as a whole is 150 acres. This section is about 11 acres, but it certainly is a very dense node and core, as the original plan called out. It is a core of Northgate. The only other property within Northgate as a whole that is owned by the city is actually the park. So this is Northgate Park. It is parkland. It's certainly limited on what you can do with that. It was recently, improvements were made based on parkland dedication fees about 5 years ago. There was a capital project that went through and redid some sidewalks, put some pavilions, seating, water fountains, different things like that, and kind of redeveloped the park. And really, before it gave it a lot more of a sense of place, which was in line with that implementation plan that we had. The last one that's certainly been in the news lately, as well as with the closure of Harry's this last week, is the Culpeper property. And so this is a copy of the approved preliminary plan. This was approved by the P&Z about 2 months ago, the Planning and Zoning Commission. So this kind of shows how they want to subdivide the property. So right now, that entire tract outlined in blue is unplatted, has to be platted as office property to then be developed. You can see kind of the street network that they're looking to put in there, which is in line with the UDO and how they have connectivity through that area, again, over towards, connects into Century Square, over College Avenue, reconnects into existing Church Avenue, and right now they only have plans, and we'll talk about it a little bit more in a second, for the top lot, but certainly anything they do in the bottom area will have to be subject to the same regulations of the rest of Northgate. So that does include things like larger sidewalks adjacent to buildings, bicycle parking areas, streetscaping requirements, facade improvements. It is still part of the design district. While it is over half a mile away from the area that we typically view as Northgate, it is still in that district. One of the biggest changes, of course, that you can see in Northgate is the number of high-rises. So again, how we would kind of look at and how we would define high-rises is a little bit, I think back when the plan was first envisioned, hearing about a 4-story structure would be pretty cool. That was probably unheard of. We're up to about 20 stories now, 20 to 23. And so here is a snapshot of every high-rise within the Northgate area as a whole. It consists of, I think it's 19 of them total. So the yellow stars represent high-rises that are built or currently under construction. Again, there are a decent amount in that 4 to 5 story range, and then the Rise was the first one that jumps in at 18 stories, and then you have a couple at 19, a couple others at 17, and the 2 actually in orange are currently in for permitting, and those are proposed to be 23 stories tall. So the one is right across from the surface lot, the other one is right next to the spot. That one's also in for permitting as well. And so when you look at all these properties, there's 20 structures being shown on the screen. These 20 structures, outside of 5 of them that are being permitted, so 15 of them, account for 75% of the appraised value for Northgate alone between those 15 structures. Of that, there are currently about 7,000 beds in these structures. When the 3 that are currently being constructed, that'll bring the number up to 9,200 beds in the area. And then if those other 2 projects do come to fruition and they do build, we're looking at about 11,000 beds between these 20 structures just in Northgate. Just to kind of give you an idea again of the significant changes that we've seen through the efforts of past councils as well. Here's a couple before and after images that we were able to pull up from Project Hold, as well as a video from 1994, kind of based off that Northgate visioning initial document. And so the top left and the top right are before and afters. Again, this is from 1994 to present. So you can obviously, the skyline is significantly different. You can see the Shadow Canyon area on the right-hand side of the top left image. What's now Chimmy's and Good Bull Barbecue in the center of the screen on the right. You can see that same building on the left. The other before and after is College, Maine. And so you can see prior to it being closed off as a city street and becoming a promenade area. You can see the couple of the same structures, the same sign even for the boot shop there. And that is not alcohol in the picture, I promise. It's concrete, so don't get too worried.
It's Northgate.
Yeah, it was construction work, I promise. Wasn't drinking. This is, again, from a video in 1994. The top left is actually what is now the Promenade. So you can kind of make it out in the top right, and in the middle of the screen, that's the chicken and Dudley's Draw. And so this is obviously on the bottom right, this is a more modern day image of what the Promenade looks like. Certainly much different than what it was back in the day. This one I'm going to orient you a little bit because it confused a couple people, but we are at the city limit line looking towards the university. So if you're looking in the bottom right picture on the right, top right of the screen is Kyle Field. In the middle of the screen, that is 315 College Main, or known as the Rev. Right behind that is the city's parking garage. And so just to give you an idea, again, the image on the top left is an aerial from 1994 when we first started these planning efforts. The large red box on the side of the screen here is the Traditions apartment complex and then Cherry Street Apartments. This is that high-rise you see in the middle of the screen, 315. This is the city's parking garage, the surface lot, and then over in the top left, that is the Rise and the Standard, kind of the first two major high-rises that came into the city. Again, just to give a little history on Northgate and its occupancy increase, there was a presentation actually done 2 years ago, I think, where there were some population estimates given. Northgate for a long time was around 1,000 people, give or take, in it. And then about in 2012, we kind of started exploding exponentially. And again, now we're in about 9,000 in the Northgate area. When we look at the entirety of the planning area that we're talking about, you're talking about 11,000 people when you take into account North Point Crossing, the residents of Century Square. In that kind of mile or so area, you've got about 11,000 people currently looking to certainly put in more as development continues. So again, what could this small area plan look like? Again, want to make sure that we're all on the same page if we move forward with this, that council's direction. What is that boundary area? And so right now we're showing it as was kind of envisioned, was from Texas Avenue, again, over to Welburn, University Drive being the base and the city limits, and some level of connectivity at inflow, the city limit line with City of Bryan being the top end of that. Timeline-wise, we'd be looking to make this a fairly quick process, and kind of what we'd be looking at. So kind of in that 4 to 6 month range to put this together and bring it back to the council for some implementation. It would certainly, we'd look to start that in January, and we'll have some timeline stuff here in a little bit, but this is kind of a slide for y'all's discussion on what it is you would like to see in a small area plan. Public engagement process, we'd certainly be getting with all the stakeholders that are involved in this area, so that involves just about everybody in the community. So you've got A&M, of course, with the university, as well as Central Park, the developers of Century Square, which is also in conjunction with A&M, TxDOT with all the university crossings, the Northgate Association, and those property owners, as well as business owners, the City of Bryan and their development, and of course the broader public at large. That would consist of primarily some public workshops, in-person discussions and ideas on what it is they look to see. What we kind of would envision now focusing on would be, what does that connectivity look like with all these different developments? So we talked about a lot going on in this area. What is that connection between each of these uses and those plans? Are there any regulatory changes that we want to look at? It's another thing, right? So are there things that could change from the city perspective on things like parking requirements? Do we need more parking, less parking, pedestrian requirements? Should there be more emphasis on bike lanes or bike paths? Should there be more emphasis on pedestrian avenues and promenades versus streets? Speaking of streets, should we look at doing one-way streets? That's been an idea for some time. Do you turn Northgate into more of a kind of your standard downtown feel, maybe where you've got one-way streets, they go in one direction, maybe you have parking off the streets, keeping in mind some different challenges there with fire lanes and high-rises and making sure we have that appropriate coverage. Are there different things that we want to look at from a land use change? Do we want to try to incentivize things like commercial development in this area? With the City of Bryan's project doing heavy residential use, do we want to look at doing commercial, incentivizing commercial in that area? And then, of course, what are as we go through this process, or if we go through this process, what do the community stakeholders want? What are their visions for the area as well? That's all I have for now. Happy to answer any questions, as I'm sure there are some.
I think this would be a good time to ask staff or ask council if they have questions on small area plan discussion that Anthony's presented. We'll have Mr. Ostrowski follow up with the other discussions as well. Any questions for staff at this point?
Yeah.
Melissa? Oh, I'm sorry, Mark, you did raise your hand.
I
I'm sorry.
think that your first question is a good one, and it's a good question to ask of the council when we talk about the boundary area for the small area plan. What is it that we're looking at? Are we looking at the entire Northgate area? Or are we really just thinking in terms of a master plan for the NG1 or the entertainment district? What is it we're looking for? I think as a council, we need to decide that.
Just to give you some scope on that. So the whole area that we're showing here is about 335 acres total. 150 is about Northgate proper. The existing Northgate area is 150 acres. Hensel Park and Century Square make out about 140, and then the Northeast Gateway area is about 20, just for some size.
But as I recall, the suggestion was the entire corridor along there, maybe including certainly Hensel. Is that what you're thinking in terms of this 4 to 6 months? I mean, that answering the question, what's he proposing?
Yeah, yes, sir. Yeah, I think that, again, this is kind of what staff's thoughts would be on what we would look to as a small area plan. Again, taking in mind what the request was. Again, bringing all of this area and these entities in to have more conversations. We have conversations already on all these, but it certainly doesn't hurt to put something together on how we ensure some connectivity and have some guiding documents, at least for the city's perspective, on what we'd like to see. And then, again, for staff, as we have conversations with these various stakeholders, what is it that our vision is?
Okay, that's something we can talk about, right? Yeah. Okay, Ms. McElhaney.
One thing that came up as we were discussing doing a small area plan for Northgate was how do we keep citizens and council linked? And I think it was Ms. Prohaska had mentioned the possibility of doing some special workshop meetings that had council and public together. I would personally very much like to make sure that we are part of that discussion during the ongoing development of these ideas and not just presented with a plan on the back end. I think that the city has done a lot of planning, but it's been spot planning. And I do wholeheartedly think that we need to look at this whole area holistically and put a plan together, or at least a vision together of how we would like to see it developed. It's moving really quickly. And if we look, I came here in 1994. So I think that may have been my dad's truck parked over there by the chicken. But anyway, time flies and everything here is growing so quickly, and we're going to lose any ability to really influence it in a meaningful manner if we aren't looking at it holistically.
Mr. Yancey.
Thank you, Mr. Armstrong. This is directly responsive to what I was thinking when I asked that we look at this, and I commend you on that. The breadth and detail of your presentation, spot on. I mean, this gives me hope. I feel better that, we're headed in the right direction generally, that we're going to look at this. And now just a general question as a planning professional. Like in outlying subdivisions of single-family residential homes, it's anticipated that they're going to have to get in their car for the most part, right, in the old traditional style anyway, and drive to the grocery store or, to the cleaners or what have you. Have you guys given some general thought from a planning perspective, or do y'all have internal debates about how are we going to service this density of population from an amenities standpoint without people having to get in their car and go? Do we give thought to that, just generally speaking?
A lot. I think we have a lot of spirited debates among staff on terms of kind of different ideas on what could help here. I think a big piece, and it actually even back in 1996 when the Northgate plan was first envisioned, the number one thing in there mentioned that would help this area grow from a walkability standpoint, like you mentioned, is a grocer. And so something as simple as you can leave your place of dwelling to get groceries without getting in a vehicle. You can't do that in this location currently. And that I think is the biggest hiccup currently in getting, having someone develop something that gets a grocery tenant in there to help make this a truly walkable environment. There are a lot of restaurants. There's a lot of entertainment options. There's lots of it, they've got their, a large, overwhelming majority by far in this area are students, of course, and so their primary place of work is the university, right? And so they have all of the pieces of the puzzle, minus how do they get food to buy groceries. And so there's certainly things that we could look at with this plan as far as, and there's a lot of it already as far as transit with the university, the bus routes, things like that to help people get to those locations without the use of their own vehicle. But currently we just don't see that. There's, and even back in 96, there was a larger percentage of international students that lived in this area, and they tend to sometimes come without a vehicle. And so that cuts down a little bit, but not a lot. Generally speaking, people are still using their cars to come to this area. Certainly they have friends who live in these, live in the high rises, live in these areas. They got to come visit their friends, and they don't have a place to park either. And then of course you have the existing commercial establishments that they, the patrons, if I as someone who don't live in here and if I want to go to this area to visit, I have to find somewhere to park and how to get there to drive from South College Station up. So I think we have a lot of conversations about that and what would be helpful. Ultimately, we are somewhat reliant on looking at the market and our strategies to try to pull some sort of grocery use into the area.
Peaceful coexistence between an entertainment district and a downtown style urban living high density district like this is. I've stumbled across a couple articles. I'm not a professional planner. Do you guys have spirited conversations about that too, or is there preconceived notions about this goes completely urban residential and the entertainment district piece is kind of an also ran, or do y'all have those kind of discussions?
I might not totally be following, but I'll try my best. Sorry. So I would say there's certainly a marriage of those two relationships. It is an interesting relationship right now because, again, as a university town, again, there's 9,000 or so beds in these high rises alone. That's just the high rises, not taking into account other living facilities. Even if you guessed a equal distribution, 75% of those people can't participate in our entertainment district, legally speaking, from an alcohol standpoint, right? Just by age. They don't meet the age requirement. Who knows what happens? But that certainly creates an interesting dynamic as far as there is all this density. The uses that are in that area are tailored towards, or at least you participating 100% in that are tailored towards a older audience. That does create an interesting dynamic, but it's certainly not one that, kicks the other out or removes one. They can certainly, and they live right now in harmonious, fairly well together. We don't get a lot of issues or complaints from the high rises about activities happening in the night hours. I don't think we hear from the bar owners about people being in these establishments. I think the biggest thing that we hear complaints about is parking in Northgate. And again, parking will probably be a hot topic in the planning world and anybody's world until the day we all die, but it'll never go away, unfortunately. But outside of that, I think there's opportunities for more density, and hopefully that drives some mixed-use development would be the big thing. And I think that's something that planners everywhere talk about mixed use. It's a big proponent and something I think that when we talk about these urban areas as we build up, 20 stories, 23 stories of residential that's a lot of people in a small area. It would be nice if they could live and work and play in that one environment, and that's kind of scholastic goal, if you will, of planning and kind of what we envision. It isn't even what they talked about as the immediate goal in the 1996 and 2003 plans, but it is certainly what we've talked about, I would say, since the early 2010s as we saw this area start to develop, that this is our prime location. And again, when you look at kind of taxable value and what we have on the area, our number 3 highest taxpayer in the city of College Station is a property in Northgate, beaten only by another very large area of student living with the cottages, and then Fujifilm, who takes the cake by a long shot. But it is almost $100 million of a single use. So there's a lot of money, a lot of potential, both with the students coming in there and what those developers can offer with mixed-use structures, I think.
Great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Yancey, you finished? Okay, Mr. Schaefer.
Yeah, just very quickly, Anthony, thank you for the presentation, and I agree with Bob. I think this is what I was also thinking when he made this request, and we had talked about it some, needing to think about the entire area. And I would also second what Melissa said about having the council involved. I think it's going to be really helpful if we can get everybody together and talk about this really critical area. Thank you.
You're backing out of all of yours here, huh?
Getting forward so I can pass the plate
Getting
off
back
to
the
Michael
beginning.
and
Okay.
I can maybe sit down.
Okay.
I've been too
That-
long-winded, I'm
That's
sure.
where Mr. Ostrowski will start.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm sure we'll have further conversations, but we'll finish with Mr. Ostrowski's presentation, not finish, but hear his presentation, then we'll have another round of questions, and then we'll open up. I have 6 people signed up to speak on this item.
All right, good evening, Council, Mayor, Michael Ostrowski, Chief Development Officer. Thank you, Anthony, for providing the background on small area planning and kind of what that can mean for this area. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Northgate surface lot and the process that we have going for the potential sale and redevelopment of that lot, and why we chose the specific process that we did for this instance. So just a little bit of background, the city has been approached several times in the past about the potential purchase of the Northgate lot. Back in 2014, 2015, had very similar discussions, ultimately did not ending up moving forward with it. More recently, approached by a developer about a year ago, earlier this year, wanting to purchase the Northgate lot. I had numerous conversations with that development group, really looking at a concept and what that could be, and establishing some of the parameters that, if the city were to sell a property, and specifically this one, what additional components generally we would want to see before we would sell that property, because the intent with this is that we don't want to sell it just for the highest dollar. It is a very important piece of property to the overall Northgate and the city itself. So when we talked with that developer, and these you'll see also as we went through the public bid process, there were several things that we wanted to include in any sale of this lot. And a lot of these, come from prior conversations, what we've heard in the past from business owners or property owners within the Northgate area, the general public, various city departments, customers in the area. There are several things that are paramount or very important to preserve that this property can do if done correctly. One, as Anthony had mentioned, parking is a huge concern in the area. We're seeing a lot of residential uses down there. Our goal is to see additional commercial uses down there, and parking is very important for their survival. So the Northgate surface lot has about 100 parking stalls. So as part of any sale of this lot, we wanted those to be replaced. So we made that a requirement of the bid document as we put out. Rideshare and drop-off opportunities, recognizing that this is more of a bar district and a lot of people get dropped off and picked up for various different reasons. That is a big component to this district as well. and speaking with our PD and making sure that we have a safe presence down there, space for a law enforcement substation that could be included as part of this, public restroom facilities, refuge container storage, as well as the promenade area and the plaza area that this could create to help activate this space, especially being on the backs of a lot of the historic buildings that front on University. But as you turn around and look at the backward presence of this, how could we activate that area with the promenade? So to make sure all these components were included, and since we are a city, and this is municipally owned property, there are specific ways in which cities can generally dispose of property like this. One, we can put it out for public auction, and then that property goes to the highest bidder. We don't attach conditions to it. It ends up just going to the highest bidder, and we don't get a chance to help shape what that property becomes. Second, we can list it with a broker, and we've done this in the past, and similar to like the 28 acres that we have for sale by Costco, and then we have to accept the highest cash offer that is received for this. Or third, we go through a sealed bid process, and this is the process that we chose for a variety of different reasons, where we don't necessarily just have to take the highest cash offer. While we can still take the offer that has the highest cash offer, that isn't necessarily the only thing that we look at, right? We look at what is the best value for the taxpayers and the city through that process. So this was the process that we had selected, and we can use this to put out the sealed bids, get proposals back, and see what the market is showing us, and then make that selection based off a number of different factors that we establish. So to walk through, the specific process with this particular property. The city released a request for bids back in July. That process was opened for a little over a month, so the bids were due August 22nd. The city then started the review of bids. On the right-hand side, you can see the criteria that we established as part of the bidding component. We wanted to make sure that the firms and developers that were submitted on this project and wanting to sale or purchase of the property, that they had good qualifications, good experience, not only with the development firm, but the key personnel. What sort of overall value and impact that the proposed redevelopment project would have on the city. And this didn't necessarily mean just the financials, and that was a separate component. This was, how does this really activate that area? How does it include the additional components that we've established that we wanted to see in this area, and how they incorporate that into the project? Overall financial benefit to the city, what would the purchase price be? What would the value be to the overall redevelopment? What ongoing city-related costs we might see? Are there any incentives that are requested by the developer that would bring down that financial benefit? And then kind of the references that they provided as well. So we had 3 bids that were submitted. All of them met the additional components in a variety of different ways. The offers range from $3.674 million to $13 million. And the property itself, some of the offers bid on only an acre of property. The others, some of them bid on the full property at 1.57 acres. So going through that, we did the selection of the top-ranked firm. The firm that we had selected to start the negotiations with for the real estate contract was Capstone Communities. They had proposed a multi-story, high-rise, mixed-use development, included all the additional components. They did have a $13 million purchase price for the entire property, and they also offered the city a 50-50 revenue share for the parking. So not only is the parking included as part of the development that they would be constructing, and the 100 spaces are available for the city use, they would share in the revenue that would come from those parking spaces back to the city. So currently, we're at the stage where we're in negotiation of a real estate contract, and this really is essentially establishing the general parameters of the project, the purchase price, timeline for construction, kind of what property would be included. Moving forward, the anticipation would be that we'd have a real estate contract anticipated in front of council in January for the council to consider. And the one difference with this process and why one of the reasons why we chose it is that just because we approve the real estate contract, let's say that comes back here in January, just because we approve the real estate contract does not automatically mean that the land is then transferred. There are multiple steps in this process, and that was one of the reasons why we chose it. So when we go through the real estate process, the purchaser would have a due diligence period of 120 days after the approval of the real estate contract to really look at the property, make sure it is what they intended it to be, analyze additional costs. There's electrical infrastructure that needs to be removed, talking about timeline, working with the police department, what establishment of the law enforcement substation. But then we'd also have to enter into a development agreement that would outline all of those specifics. And that would be needed in order for us to close on the property. If we can't get to an agreement on the development agreement, either on the purchaser side or the city side, then we can end the real estate contract. We don't have to move forward with that anymore, and we could move on to either the next potential bidder or we could open this back up for additional bids. And then finally, after that, there would be closing on the property after all of the governmental approvals would be gained by the developer. So with that, in recognizing the importance of this property, talking about where do these public engagement opportunities happen, there are a variety of opportunities for the public engagement. And one of the things that we wanted to do with this is to establish a partner to start working with. So as we start talking about a larger vision for this area, kind of a small area plan, one of the things that can be helpful when you have a specific site, because typically these small area planning efforts don't drill down on a specific site and say, this is exactly how it's going to look. You've seen a lot of the plans that we've happened in the past. They will provide generalities of what could occur on the site, maybe the massing to determine kind of the density. But through this process, one, we're going to have a due diligence period with the developer where the developer is going to come in, determine kind of what is really the extent of the project boundary in terms of the building, right? Where does the building fit on the lot? And as part of that, we've got to really define kind of what is the more plaza open area that is going to really help activate this site. So once we can establish that, and that'll be through a public process, stakeholder involvement, not only with the surrounding property owners, but also the general public, we can establish kind of what that plaza area is. And then after that due diligence period, working through a development agreement with the developer to get more specific in what these areas look like. What does the plaza area contain? How does it relate to the other buildings around it? What is the general site plan of the development? And then following that, and before construction would start, I know I've heard one of the concerns has also been, what happens during construction, right? And so as we take 100 parking spaces offline, as deliveries need to still occur to the backs of a lot of those buildings, as traffic needs to still get through these areas, coordination through construction with the surrounding business owners to make sure that continues to run smoothly. So we received this earlier from some of the Northgate representatives and really, for general ask from the Northgate district. And quite honestly, I think these are very reasonable and can be very productive as we go through these. And I think that the process that we have established with having a separate real estate contract to get the property under contract and allow us to start having further conversations and stakeholder involvement gets us there and really addresses all four of these asks. The first one is invest in the old and the new and the future of Northgate. It allows, with the purchase of this property and the sale price, it allows both the city and the developer to really invest back into Northgate, including improvements to the plaza area, new and improved parking spaces, potentially using some of the proceeds you could, for example, Anthony talked about a lot of facade improvement grant programs that we had previously. You could take some of that revenue and put it back into facade improvements of some of the historic buildings that are there that would front now on this newly improved plaza area. So there are great opportunities to address the first point. The second one, partner and communicate with Northgate. Through this process, there will be multiple opportunities for stakeholder involvement and kind of what this area becomes and how it is shaped. This is in addition to the larger planning effort that you could also have going with the small area plans, should you choose to move forward with that. Community benefits, talking about making sure that public accessible parking, rideshare opportunities, inclusion of complementary business uses within the area. All of that is included as part of the additional components. Specifically the parking, the rideshare opportunities, trying to activate also the ground floor of this facility in making sure that it isn't just parking or isn't just leasing opportunities, but establishing some additional retail within here to help activate these spaces. One of the more important things in order to drive some of these other retail uses, I know Anthony showed a slide up there and kind of how many bars are in this area. One of the things you need to continuously do to drive other retail is establishment of additional density. Additional rooftops in this area will help drive other support retail uses in getting that density and making sure that works cohesively with one another. And then finally, the last one, the construction mitigation plan. As part of this process, absolutely, this would be part of the conversation. How do we address access to the backs of these buildings during construction? What happens with customer parking within this area? City has other assets in the city in terms of parking ramps and so forth, so that will definitely be part of those discussions, but we first really need to establish what this development really becomes before we can start planning for the construction mitigation plan. So our recommendation is to start the small area planning process for Northgate. I think it provides a good overall vision and kind of what that area can become, how it can start connecting with some of the other areas, including Century Square, Hensel Park redevelopment, Brian's plan to the north, as well as the university properties, but simultaneously continue to move forward with this process for the sale and of the parking lot, with the understanding that there are going to be various opportunities for public engagement, and that the city doesn't relinquish control of the property with just the approval of the real estate contract in January, if we do decide to move forward with it in January. What that real estate contract really does is it really gives us the opportunity to start then working with that developer and some of the finer components and specifics of the development moving forward. So what would this kind of look like? January 25, starting the small area plan for Northgate, approval potentially of that real estate agreement with the potential developer. February through March, continue that small area planning effort, various public engagement opportunities on the specific property sale side of things, public engagement to really determine the development of the parking lot itself as well as the plaza space, and really determining how big that plaza space needs to be. Maybe it doesn't need to be extremely large, but it needs to be activated appropriately. But in order for the developer to move forward for understanding what the finances will be for the project, they need to know how big they can go in terms of a footprint and how many units potentially that they could get within it. Come May, June of 2025, finalize a small area plan. The due diligence process ends ultimately with the developer. If the developer is comfortable with kind of the conversations that have occurred and it still meets their intended desire of the construction of their project, they can move forward with the due diligence. We'd then enter or complete the due diligence. We'd then move forward with the development agreement negotiations really between June 2025 and before closing. Continue to have those public engagement opportunities as we develop the components of that development agreement. As part of that development agreement, we'd include a site plan of what the development would look like. That will essentially control how this development takes shape, which is not something that you would typically see in a private construction project, right? We typically don't get into that level of detail where that's guaranteed. And then we'd negotiate and finalize the development agreement prior to closing. And then before the closing on the property probably would occur after all governmental approvals would be in place. That would likely be early summer of 2026. So, I just want to kind of reiterate the specific reason why we chose this property. Ultimately, it gets the best value for the city, gives us opportunity to work with a particular developer to make sure the project is what it is that we intended it to be. But it also provides for a fair and open process for developers to submit different ideas for the site. So that concludes my presentation. Happy to answer any questions as it relates to the specific process that we took here.
Do you see any questions for Mr. Ostrowski, Mr. Smith? Mr. White, I'm sorry.
Thank you so much. Very informative. I really appreciate it. Let me clarify a couple things. you mentioned during that due diligence period that the developer will really focus on the infrastructure of what that property would be. Is there any, the Northgate district, one of their areas that they really want to see is engagement? Is there engagement during that period, or is there only engagement after we do the development agreement?
No, there would be engagement during that first 120-day due diligence period. And the reason why there needs to be heavy engagement during that period of time is that we really need to establish what is the plaza area? What does this public space look like, right? And so the proposal that we have moved forward with has intended to take the entire 1.57 acres, the entire parking lot, leaving, plaza space to the south, but we really need to determine kind of what the sizing of that will be in order for the developer to move forward with the sizing of the rest of the construction of their project. Because let's say we want to add, 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 square foot green area and take a good chunk of that area that they were looking to develop with building. That may impact the purchase price. That may also impact the height of the building. So they need to know that up front. So there will be heavy engagement within not only within the first 120 days during their due diligence period, because if they get to a point where, let's say, the green area is too big or the plaza area is too big, it doesn't make the project work, they can then walk away, and then we can move forward with either a different proposal or a different bidding process. But then there would also be additional public engagement after that, right? After they get through the real estate agreement, after the due diligence process, there's going to be a whole conversation about the particulars of the project and how it lays out, how it interacts with the rest of the properties around it through that development agreement negotiation.
You mentioned the vision. So is it the developer going to bring to the council, the city, their vision, or is the city bringing to the developer our vision?
So it would be the city bringing the developer the vision, right? So how does this area facilitate that larger vision of the small area planning effort?
Okay, thank you.
Ms. McElhaney.
First of all, I just want to note on this slide here, any self-respecting Aggie would call it the front porch at Northgate. Anyway, those, no. I have several questions. One thing that you said that was kind of interesting was that all approvals will be in place ahead of the sale of the land. You're thinking that we would sell and immediately start work on the project. Is that?
Yeah, the intent of the way they move forward with the purchase of the property, right? The developer doesn't want to hold the property. They don't want to speculate. So what they want to do is get all the approvals in place. So, if it's a high-rise structure, typically you require zoning board of appeals to approve a height variance, building permits, site plan approvals, all of that wanting to be in place before the transfer of property occurs.
So, being a very small minnow in the building community, I know that the planning process, architectural fees, engineer fees, permit fees, it's exorbitant. So I'm really trying to wrap my head around the contracting process. What incentives does this buyer have to go all the way to that point and it still may not close?
So steps in the process. We've got the real estate agreement, really, that establishes the general parameters, right, but doesn't guarantee the sale of the property. They do their due diligence period. After they finalize their due diligence period, we go through the development agreement period. And that's really where all of the components come into this. The general site plan is going to be included within the development agreement. And then once we agree to the development agreement, that's where they have the kind of, I would say, general guarantee that we would move forward with the approval of the sale of the property. But they won't close on it until they have the other components in place as well.
And if they do not comply with the pieces of the stipulations set forth in the development agreement, we could terminate even though they've already put all this investment in?
Yeah, they have to comply with the provisions of the development agreement. Otherwise, we'll have penalty provisions in there. You could have a termination clause in there. You could have clawbacks in terms of additional financial repercussions that they would face if they didn't comply with those components.
Okay, to a layperson, this process is completely foreign. We've got a large offer on the table. We have not negotiated the terms, but we're going to do this. Is this a process that is routinely used by this city? And if so, is it something that typically goes to completion, or do they typically fall apart?
So normally we have sold property via the broker method, right? And so you look at 28 acres north of Costco, we're using the broker method. Our business parks, we sell that land via broker method. You typically use this type of sale process when you want something real specific on a property and establishing that vision, because this gives you that avenue to do that. I've worked in other communities where, we will put request for proposals for individuals to bid on the process, and that's a fairly common procedure to go through. But in our city, most of our sale of property has been through the broker method.
Have we used this process before successfully?
I don't recall. I mean, not in my time where we've put it out for a public bid in the redevelopment of property. We have used this for this process. We have also used this for the former Macy's as part of the Post Oak Mall.
I'm still really struggling with the idea of not having our goals defined and with this particular process, but can't wait to hear what everybody else says.
I think just maybe one of the components there to that, and I think what can help facilitate the small area planning effort is having a partner on board with a particular developer, because you can work with that developer to get to that established vision as you work through that small area planning effort to make sure everything aligns. A lot of times when you go through these small area planning efforts, it's a lot of hypotheticals. Here's what we would maybe want on the property, but is it truly financially feasible for someone to come in and construct that? We have a developer that is willing to work with us and partner to see that larger vision. A lot of times you don't have that. And I think having that and going through these processes simultaneously is a benefit.
One last question, Mayor, if you don't mind. Will we have the opportunity to I may feel better if I could talk to this developer. That right now it's this developer.
Yes.
But I would be interested to hear someone on that side say, yes, this is something we would absolutely want to work with.
Yes, the developer would be here as part of the real estate contract.
And I just want to add, Councilmember, one, we haven't really as a city done a project like this. I mean, we've sold property. Probably the closest thing when you look at the process is when we go through economic development agreements with people developing businesses here. Now, some of those, we own the property and they're coming in, but that's probably the closest thing, even though this is not a job generator. That's essentially what you're doing. Someone comes in, they're going to put value on the ground, they're going to bring jobs in that case. And so we may sell them property, but there's an economic development agreement attached to it that has obviously certain standards that they have to meet, and then the same thing, clawbacks and these types of things. What's a little bit different in this scenario is we have the ability, because we're talking about really how something is built instead of like jobs or certain things, to control whether they actually get to do it and they get to understand what we want them to do. So we have more control over it, actually, versus if a company comes in and we agree to an economic development agreement with them and say, here are all the terms that we all agree on. They go build it and then say, we actually can't meet the terms of that. Then we go to kind of those clawbacks, because it's more on a fiscal basis. So that is a similar process. And to what we're doing here, it's just that here, instead of having jobs and specific performance mechanisms like that, we're talking about physical construction of things and how it relates and how we control that.
Mr. Yancey.
Thank you, Mayor. Michael, try to choose my words carefully here. So you guys, going back to the first half of the presentation, I kind of thought we were going to have a debate about whether or not we have a small area plan. I'm glad that we're not having that debate. It sounds like staff has now concluded that we do need one. Is that the case?
I think it can provide value. I mean, we've seen a lot of growth in the Northgate area. I think going through this small area planning effort and also understanding what you want to achieve out of it, right? Because a lot of the areas that we're looking at, that Anthony had provided, a lot of them have already been developed, right? And so you look at Century Square. It's fairly developed. There's a few more pieces and components there. You look at a good chunk of Northgate. There's been a number of high-rises that have gone in. There are some lots that are still available. So looking at kind of what the goals of these small area planning efforts are, I think is extremely important. I think we can talk about those specific connections, how pedestrian accommodations, how this area connects to Hensel Park, how it connects to the city of Bryan, how it connects in kind of that mobility aspect of it within it. I do think, there are some components of like I said, the small area planning effort that you would not typically have with like the individual design of a lot, right? That's not what a small area planning effort typically does. But through this process with the small area planning effort and having a developer on board, you get that opportunity to do that. And I think that's one of the benefits of here. So I do think there's a value to obviously I'm a planner. I've been a planner for a very long time. And I do enjoy going through that. And I think there is a great benefit to see that. And we are seeing a lot of growth in that area and how this area continues to grow. Because what we've also seen is that Northgate used to be kind of a more commercial area, has transitioned more to higher density residential. But what we're seeing is a lot of that shift of where that commercial is happening is probably moving a little bit further east, right? It's moving towards, the university and college intersection, the Century Square development. It doesn't mean it still can't continue to occur in Northgate, but the market has put a lot of pressure in the Northgate area in terms of making that a high-density residential area. But I think we can come in and still add additional supportive commercial uses for those units.
But staff's recommendation is to do this small area plan.
Correct.
On this slide right here, public engagement on improvements to plaza area. We're not limiting ourselves to just an engagement process that shapes the plaza area. I mean, we're going to be looking kind of more holistically, right, at this development.
Yeah.
It was either your presentation or Anthony's that had mentioned additional retail. I mean, everything's on the table. This is essentially a canvas, a blank canvas that the citizens are going to have their opportunity to weigh in on this important district for our city. Is that correct?
That's correct. I mean, we have a general proposal from the developer, but again, as we start working through the specific details in terms of trying to how this project relates to what around it, the uses within it on that ground floor are very important. How the plaza is developed, how the pedestrian connections are made, all of that can be discussed as part of that process.
So I noticed the schematics were missing from the capstone proposal. That's because it does not reflect today what the citizens want or even we want. Is that fair?
I wouldn't necessarily go that far. I would say that it's not included as part of this because it is likely to change, right? And so while they submitted a proposal that had a specific schematic, recognizing they had 30 days to respond to this, right? So it is going to be very conceptual in nature, and understanding that the reason why we went through this process is we can have some of those refinements. And that will happen as part of the due diligence process and in those conversations with the public and that engagement, as well as the development agreement. But absolutely, that concept is likely going to change, but their proposal that they submitted was based off of that concept and kind of the density that they could create and the components that would be included in it.
So you're basically telling us and our bosses, the citizens, that everybody's going to get their say and that this is likely going to significantly change to the point where we didn't include the schematics of the proposal that we accepted in this presentation tonight. And if the citizens want to change it completely and they don't want a student tower or they want a different kind of structure and it's the will of the council as expressed through the citizens that's what may very well happen. Does Capstone understand that?
So if we cannot agree to a development agreement, the process does not move forward.
Thank you very
I
much.
just want to add to what the councilman asked. When we talked to Capstone, one, I would say they're very for what we've proposed here too, and even the outreach piece of it. They're not here and we're not going through that because until the council gives us direction, then that's not where we are. And they also, that due diligence period, we've talked about it, but the due diligence period on our side of like, is this what we want? They're in the same boat. They want to go on, but if we come back with and say, we don't want what you want to build here, that protects them as well. So, especially, I think the big piece is, if this is a building, how big can it be? And then a few of those components are what really this comes down to for like moving forward. And if we get to that due diligence period end and this is the public space, this is the kind of makeup, and there's an agreement, then that's where it goes forward. We may have if we had a vision that was radically different than this or radically different than what they had, then that may be a departure point. But both sides in a development agreement want to get to that point. And if you're dealing with a public entity, you understand that there's public input, whether that comes from meetings or council or however it is. And I think they certainly understand that.
Thank you very much for that clarification. And last question, Mr. Ostrowski, on your portion of the presentation, the last slide, where it showed what was it, the back alley or it references the West End in Dallas. There was a little, right there on the bottom right portion. I mean, that's where did that statement come from?
That's out of their proposal.
Oh, out of their proposal.
And again, it's an attempt to look at branding of the area and activating that space. Doesn't mean that's what it's going to be called, but essentially what they're trying to communicate is that they're willing to work with us to brand this space and make it something unique to College Station. Again, we didn't want to sell this property just for the highest dollar. We wanted to make sure that this is something special, and they understand that as part of those negotiations.
And it would be typical for the builder to include a vision statement. I mean, this is essentially a vision statement for one that I happen to generally agree with, depending on what the final schematics look like. But it's typical for them to include something like that.
Yes, as part of proposal submissions, yeah, it's absolutely typical that they will provide a vision statement, images of what their ideas are, if they don't have enough time to put together specific components of that, but absolutely it's typical as part of the process.
Thank you very much, Michael. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Yancey. Mr. Schaefer.
I would just quickly say thanks, Michael, and I'm appreciative of the questions that my fellow council members have posed, and I generally feel really good about this. I'm glad that we're taking this opportunity to gain input from a lot of different kinds of people in the community. It is a very critical space. I did want to clarify, and I think the city manager just did that, and Bob did that with his questions, but we talked a lot about the developer being able to walk away if they weren't happy, but what I'm hearing is that's true for us too. We can
That's
walk
correct.
away if we're not happy. So I just want to make that clear.
That's correct.
Okay, it sounds like we have appropriate pause in the questions and clarifications. We do have, this is not a public hearing, but as with all items on our agenda, we're happy to hear from citizens. I have 6 people that have registered to speak to us, so if the council doesn't object, I will invite them forward in the order that they are listed on my document here. We're going to start with with Storm Mills. Storm Mills is here. Yes, please come forward. You have 3 minutes to provide your input into this discussion. Identify yourself and what you're associated with, and we're happy to hear from you.
Okay, my name is Storm Mills. I'm in College Station off of Southwest Parkway, and I was kind of coming here today to talk to mayor, council, and the business owners who may be in the crowd to kind of emphasize my opinion on what it means to support local businesses. I've heard the voices of only a few hundred of the thousands of citizens that frequent Northgate not only every day, but especially every weekend. And I am here on behalf of them as their voice to underline how our Northgate has become an irreplaceable representation of small business ingenuity, camaraderie, and pride. The Northgate District is more than just a series of restaurants and old bars to us. It is a living piece of our history. For decades, it has united us around the cherished moments like late-night dancing, celebratory glasses, or simply a familiar place to escape life's demands with laughter and friendship. And it has really been the heart of what we know and love as Aggieland. I would like us to consider the young men and women who have poured their hearts and their dreams into the businesses they have now and have used it to create something meaningful for us. Especially consider the blue-collar workers and the employees of this town who find themselves here relaxing most evenings and especially on the weekends. These people are the pillars that this city rests upon consistently. Their commitment to building and supporting the Northgate community sanctifies not just the businesses, but the very essence of College Station. The businesses there today have created environments where our culture not only thrives, but where our students, locals, and passersby find a sense of belonging and home. The sale of this lot threatens not only the character of our streets, but dismantles the foundation for which our love for this community rests upon. And although it seems tempting to cash in on commercial opportunities, I ask you, what value is cash if we cannot invest in the spirit of our town and the people who have built it? If we begin to sell Northgate and threaten specifically the small businesses without considering representing them, and we throw our money towards the faceless high-rise apartments, we risk losing everything that makes us irrefutably unique. So I stand before you today and ask you to pause the sale of the lot behind Northgate and consider the small business owners that could be detrimentally affected by the building of more high-rises in other areas. And I want us to stand together for all of those who have served us and shaped us into the inhabitants that we are proud to be today. I specifically speak personally. I just took my daughter to the Dixie Chicken for the first time. She's 15 months old. I want to continue that as a tradition, hoping to bring the next one there as well. So this is my appeal to you, Mayor and Council. We just lost our beloved Harry, so please keep Northgate alive, consider its citizens, its small businesses, and keep Northgate, Northgate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is Dion McGinnis, be followed by Mason Taylor.
Howdy, I'm Dion McInnes, resident of Bryan, but for 13 years, lived on the corner of Church and Boyette, closest front door to the Dixie Chicken. And if it sounds like I've rehearsed saying that, I've said that thousands of times before. One of the great prides of my life was to call Northgate home, to such a degree that I don't want to play one-upsmanship, but I brought 3 infants home from the hospital to a 900-square-foot apartment on the corner of Church and Boyette. That was their home. I'm not with them at Christmas lights tonight. And they asked why not. And I said, because Daddy's going to try and save our home. And they said, good luck, Daddy. Make it happen. Because Northgate was our home, and not just our home, but thousands of people's homes. It's not just one thing that we imagine in our mind. It is a place that we love. It is a place that stands for us because we contributed to it. We built it just by being there, by loving it. The people who cater to our experiences on Northgate, they love it too. They built that place. They made us a home. It is a beautiful spectrum of everything that makes Aggieland grand. Not one place is alike the other. When you zoom out, it is who we are. And the beautiful thing, we talk about partnerships with our institutions that are near us. The beautiful partnership that already exists is that what Aggieland is a place to come back home to. That is the draw. A place where you can come back home and be reminded of where you came from. And Northgate is a kernel, the kernel at the heart of that. It is a home that you come back to. That must be preserved. And it doesn't matter how fine what you replace anything might be. If it's new, if it doesn't represent it, if it doesn't come from the place that we called home, then it ceases to be home. So that's what I hope we all can come together on tonight. I want to recognize the positive things. Councilman Yancey, I know that you weren't speaking for yourself. You were representing this entire council in reaching out and getting input. I appreciate the council's solicitation of input and taking that seriously. I appreciate that we've had people, developers, successful people who've already invested time, talent, and resources in trying to solve this problem. I appreciate that we have this many people who care, and I know I've been asked to speak for many more people. That's what I'm here for. I appreciate how much we all love this place, and I look forward to us making the right decision and choosing to move forward in the right way.
Thank you, Mr. McGinnis. We appreciate your thoughts. Mason Taylor is next, will be followed by Ben Crockett.
Howdy, my name is Mason Taylor. I'm from Pflugerville, Texas, and I'm currently a student here at Texas A&M. I'm in the Corps of Cadets, and for the last 2 years, I've had the privilege of being a Fighting Texas Aggie Bonfire Senior Red Pot. So what that means is I've had influence of over several thousand students here at Texas A&M, as well as many people within the community around here who frequent Northgate often. We call the Dixie Chicken home and have called it home for the last 30 years since it's been open. We've all seen the building of high-rises around Northgate, and I'm sure that brings in lots of housing and lots of business opportunity, but it's not what we call home. I don't look at those high-rises and say, yeah, it's a place I want to go when I want to have a Thursday night drink after a hard exam. I want to go to the Chicken. I want to go hang out with my friends on Northgate and go to the bars out there, because that's a place that we call home. That's College Station's identity. I'm from around near Austin, and if you go out there, they have the high-rises and the fancy places and the Domain and the 6th Streets and what might you have that the T-SIPs have built down there and made lots of money off of. But that's not College Station. It doesn't look like College Station, doesn't feel like College Station. You come back to Northgate, you get your cheap beer at the Chicken, and you have a good time with your friends, and it's something that can't be replicated in any way, especially not by some multi-billion-dollar developer who's going to come out here and build a huge high-rise that's going to suffocate all of Northgate. Not to mention the amount of parking issues that you're creating as they discuss in all the planning schemes. There's just something that can't really be replaced by that. Students aren't going to come in and pay $30 to park for the night. That's ridiculous. So no matter the business opportunities you might make off of it, you're going to suffocate Northgate and take away a place that we call home. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ben Crockett? Be followed by Dee Benning.
Howdy, Council. Mr. Mayor, it's great to see you again. Members of City Council, it's great to be back here. If only for a night, Grant is doing his graduation this evening, and he asked me to come in his stead. I actually had a whole thing planned to say, but I really enjoyed staff's presentation. Our only ask is, as we go throughout this planning process for this small area plan, we would love as an organization to be able to provide input. We have a lot of students, just like Mason, that are very passionate about Northgate, and we've heard a lot of their thoughts over the past couple of weeks, and we would love to be able to provide that sort of suggestions, inputs, and context as we go throughout that small area plan process. That's really all I have to say. I hope you all have a Merry Christmas and stay warm.
Just remind the audience, you're with Student Government.
Yes, sir, with the Student Government
Office,
Association.
right, and Vice President. Thank you. Okay, Dee Benning will be followed by Courtney Phillips.
Oh, no.
You can bend the end of it. There you go.
First time on a microphone. Hi, Dee Benning, resident of Austin, Texas. I'm sorry, but proud business owner of Dudley's Draw here in Northgate. So, yeah, I know, right? Thank you all so much for the wonderful presentation. All the information that was given to us today makes me very hopeful and excited to continue good conversation on how Northgate may be developed. I definitely understand the sentiment of wanting to keep Northgate exactly how it is. My dad started Dudley's to beat the 15 months. It was my very first stop ever from the hospital, so I have a lot of love for the bar district, the restaurant district, all the business owners, small business owners, families that have their home there. This is my home. I work somewhere else, but this is my home. The thought of not having a seat at the development table and giving opinions as a business owner, homeowner, resident, and person who's going to come back to College Station is very disheartening. I am excited about the opportunity to have hopefully multiple conversations starting in January on what or if there is a development. As someone who comes here for every celebration to see my bar family and my friends, I can't think of a better way than just keeping Northgate as it is, if I'm being honest. But thank y'all for the opportunity for us to be able to have ongoing conversation and having a seat at the table. I know that it's really important for voices to be heard. And Mr. Yancey, thank you so much for wanting to represent the people of College Station in that. So thank y'all, and y'all two gentlemen, thank you for the loads of information tonight.
Thank you very much, Ms. Benning. Ms. Courtney Phillips is the next presenter. Welcome, Courtney. We appreciate you being here, and I know you represent a lot of views as well.
I am representing a lot of people. It's pretty limited views. I am Courtney. I am a resident of College Station. For those of you who don't know, I am the Director of Operations for the Dixie Chicken, been with them for 23 years, and I am a member of the Northgate District Association. So I had a great speech because I did not realize that we were going to be the council or the staff was going to present such a great small area plan idea. So thank you for that. I appreciate that. That's what we're looking for. We want to be involved. We want to be actively involved. We want our voices heard. One thing that I do want to ask staff and council, what is the backlash if we just dismiss the current RFP and start over? What happens? Why can't we do that? If we are here to create a vision for Northgate, a vision for what we want to save and protect, why continue with an RFP that did not have those parameters? What happens if we just dismiss this whole process that's already started? We create our vision, and then we put the RFPs out, or we call to request, do another request for RFPs.
Why don't you just finish your statement, and we'll ask staff to
Okay.
comment on any questions that were raised.
That's kind of it. I think that it's important for you guys to know that we know how important the redevelopment of the parking lot is. We are not here to stunt development or growth. We support it, but we want to know that we are protected, that the staff and the council is looking out for the people who are there and who have been there for 50 years, 40 years, 30 years. There's multiple businesses in Northgate who have been there for decades, and we want to know that we're going to still be there after the sale of this parking lot. The development, it gives us an extraordinary opportunity to preserve what is historic Northgate, but also create an enhanced modern area for people to visit. But I truly believe, and my colleagues on the board, or on the association, also agree that development without a plan will have devastating consequences for those of us that are there currently. And we want to know, we want some assurance, we want some guidance. We want to know that there is protection and there is thought going into this. And that's really all I got. So.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll ask staff to, I think the question you raise is a good one, and it frankly has been discussed among ourselves. What are the upsides and downsides? Yeah, I'll ask Mr. Ostrowski maybe to go through that same scenario, which we have asked about as well, that if you decline to enter into an agreement as a result of what obviously was a public and legitimate request for bids, there's certain consequences of that. That's the question she asked.
Yeah, so the reason why we chose the process that we did was to provide those levels of protection. Consequences, I mean, the council has every right to reject all bids and not move forward with any of them. I think the one value that we have here is that we have found a bidder that has provided a good purchase price, who is willing to come to the table to have discussions relating to making this process better, making the plaza area better, and making it something that we can all be proud of and going through that process. And they've also included all of the additional components that we have requested, and granted, additional things can come through the planning process, but we know we wanted to preserve certain things. So, one, we have a developer right now to do that. We had also two others who submitted. I think the risk you run, if you reject that, is reputation as a city, and that while you may go through a planning effort to get to maybe a very similar point that you're at today in what we want, and you get no bids for the sale of the property. That's one of the risks that you run. Commissioner or Councilmember McElhaney asked, have we used this process before, right? And so I think if the city has put out a process that we've established for the potential sale of that in moving forward with that, if we relinquish on that without giving at least the opportunity to go through that additional phase and kind of working through some of these particulars, I think it may hurt us in the future if we ever so decide to do additional projects and putting these out for bid and the ability for potential developers to bid on those projects.
Could I didn't ask any questions before, so let me just ask a couple. One actually, again, in Ms. Phillips' presentation, she talks about the protection of the small businesses there, and frankly, I've had interaction with landowners. I don't know, most of these are business people, and I respect what they do. The property owners have a stake in this as well. They have a different stake, and one of the property owners who owns or at least represents a substantial share of some of the most valuable property made the comment to me. He said, well, you guys, city council, took the height limits off of Northgate, and Anthony referred to that, and we did. And that was an effort to stimulate creative market-driven ideas, which we now, 15 years later, have seen. Maybe it took 10 or 15 years to really get it together and see that they could do that over there, and the market does support it. But what would happen if in some of those areas within the small area plan, where we deemed this vision and home and tradition, cultural icons, that we did impose with obviously discussion with the landowners, height limits, facade limits, something like that. It seems to me the benefit, only benefit is that would then be reflected. If that was in our code, it would be reflected in the valuation of that property at the tax office, at the appraisal office, I mean. Is that correct? Am I thinking through that the right way? Is that the main benefit? Because otherwise they're losing the value of the land if you put height restrictions on now, but the benefit would be to protect the culture and the home that people are talking about. But I think also they'd get a benefit in terms of reduced property valuation, because now they can't sell it for anything higher than, say, 2 stories or 3 stories or whatever we put it on.
I mean, I think that's an option where you could establish height limitations on certain portions of the district to help preserve the character that is there with particular buildings. I think there is definitely conversations needing to be had, though, also then with property owners and what that may mean for them. I think some may have purchased it for a particular use in the future. Whether that affects the property value at the tax office, I suppose it could, right? Because it limits what they can do on that particular property. So think of that very similar to like zoning, right? If your property is zoned single-family residential and your adjacent property is zoned commercial, that commercial property is going to have a higher value per acre because you can do more on it and you can get income from it. So it may have impacts on kind of tax rates and what they would have to pay, but there is a component there that the tax office is going to look at the neighborhood and kind of the sale of adjacent properties. But if there's limiting factors on what one can do with a property, that can be, I guess, taken into consideration as that.
Well, please note, my question does not mean I'm advocating that. I'm just exploring what Ms. Phillips talked about in terms of how do you protect the small business property, which is privately held, other than the piece of land we own, that has got a very strong market valuation. And at this point, I think I'm sure the property owners have some questions about that as well. I'm not advocating that. It's kind of the question I think would come up in the small area planning discussion, and we'd flesh it out, and we'll see whether there is any interest in the citizenship of the businesses and property owners there that would want to see that happen. And I think that'd be a very difficult undertaking, but if there's a will among the property owners there, I guess it could be considered. The other point I want to make in comment to Ms. Phillips and other comments, that the entire council up here is very much interested in the engagement of everybody in the business community and in the property ownership and the citizens at large and the student clientele that certainly use those facilities and services over there on a regular basis. So it isn't just one council member. The entire council is representing the citizens of the city, and we all are interested in the idea of having a robust planning activity that runs along with it, and as the reasons that Mr. Ostrowski explained, I guess that's their recommendation. That's the logic to their recommendation, at least. So I don't have any other questions, but I think we have finished all of the 6 people that had asked to speak. I appreciate the diversity of opinions on that, respect all of those. If there are other council members that wish to ask any more questions, we're going to return to executive session later on, and we'll probably have further discussion on what we've learned and how we should go forward. Okay? All right. Thank you, both presenters and the entire city staff for the amount of work you put into providing a good base point for where we might go forward, and we'll see how the council decides whether we're going to direct staff to move forward with this plan or some other plan for timing and sequencing of activities. Okay. If the council members are willing, we can move from workshop to regular session.